But one of the stories that goes talking about you is the fact that James O'Keefe has made $1.9 million since 2011, right? And they show your income, okay?
Okay.
And it goes from, which to me, the income is $400,000 your income, whatever it was in 2020 or 2021. We have the exact numbers based on the article. And it says, year one, he raised, it was a small thing, he raised only $400,000. And he has a job where he was working 60 hours a week or 80 hours a week, making $50K a year before. I think the article you've read before. And it goes, he raised $1 million. He raised $2 million. He raised $4 million. Now he's raising $8 million, $12 million. And eventually it was I think you raised $21 million in 2020. Whether it's 2020 or 2019, you raised something like $21 million, right? And then in the book, there's a part where they call you out and they say, well, who are the backers? Who's given the money to Project Veritas? There's an article that says Koch brothers. There's an article that says names that comes out about you, right? And then your position was, I think it has been by law to not release the information of the individuals who give money to our organization. You said something like that in your book, right? And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So you know, again, do you want people to know who gives money to your organization? Do you want the public to know who you give money to the organization?
No, it's a fundamental right enshrined in the First Amendment, freedom of association. So there's a distinction there, in that there's a chapter in this book called secrecy, and I talk a lot about this. There's three things that we can keep secret, and there's no other secrets. One of those is the donors to our nonprofit, which, by the way, don't tell us what to do. It's a freedom of association right enshrined in this case, NAACP versus Alabama, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall. Economic reprisals, loss of employment, threat of physical coercion, and manifestations of physical hostilities. There's a quote from the United States Supreme Court. You do not want to disclose donor identities to organizations, philanthropic news organizations, precisely because of the fear and the intimidation and the coercion.
Sure.
Quite different than Charlie Chester at CNN admitting what his actual and what the actual motives and agenda are. And if I was doing that, people should expose me, because these people have a tremendous power, and it's their ability to manufacture the public's consent. You know, I think that informed consent in this country is critical in the American founding and this sort of Jeffersonian ideal of the public's right to know, which makes us much different than any other country in the history of the world, perhaps, right? And the American experiment and the American ideal, that people have to have access to actual information. And the only way for them to do it, by the way, I'm a 501c3, the economics of Project Veritas. You're right, people talk about how the money we raise. We have 100,000 donors that give us this money. I started with nothing. I mean, they were saying I was funded by right-wing billionaires when I literally was broke and destitute on my credit card.
Well, were you? Did you ever?
I was so broke with that Acorn store. I took the Chesapeake Bay Bridge because it was $4 less. People thought I was nuts.
Yeah.
So they project what it's all about.
So the story about Koch brothers, that's a lie. That they never participated in helping you out with Project Veritas.
We don't disclose our donors.
Okay,
I mean, for all you know, Hillary Clinton is funding us. It doesn't matter.
Well, that would change the story. Now you got Babylon B's got a story to write about you.
But it wouldn't change the story, because the things that we're presenting are real. And Upton Sinclair, you know, people forget that, like, you know, Nellie Bly and Sinclair and Lincoln Stevens, they were all socialists. And you know what? More power to them. If you have an agenda like this, but what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't deliberately mislead and give a false impression to your viewers. It's not as much the motive or your political agenda.
Yeah.
It's that you tell a deliberate untruth to people. It doesn't matter who's funding you. It matters whether you're deliberately telling an untruth.
Yeah. So, for example, like this story, the Forbes story that was written November 11, 2011, which was a couple months ago. You've read this article. You're a guy that follows this stuff. 1.9 million since 2011. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what? That's 10 years, 11 years. I don't care how much money you're getting paid for that. So you made $400,000 last year after. You live in what state, by the way? You live
Westchester, New York.
Okay, so you're broke, is what it is. No, I mean, seriously, with you. If you're making $400,000 a year in New York, 50%, you got $200,000 left to yourself.
Well, here's an interesting thing about economics, because I think it's a fascinating question. We're a full philanthropic news organization. Now, you know, there are billionaire chairman of media companies who settle lawsuits. We've never settled a lawsuit. So it'll cost me $2 million to get the jury verdict in the court case. $2 million. We could have given someone $50,000 and settled the lawsuit. Why would we not do that? Well, if you're a businessman, if your imperative is cash, money, if you want to keep money in your pocket, you're a masochist. If you look at this and say, I could spend $50,000 to make the lawsuit go away, or I could spend $2 million, go through discovery, go to trial, and I might lose.
Yeah.
And we've never settled a case. And that's why our legal bills at Veritas are some years $5 million a year. $5 million. And all proceeds from this book goes to our organization to pay our reporters' salaries. But the economics of journalism, there's no business model for investigative reporting. It's self-evident. All of the corporations have slashed their investigative bureaus because it's too expensive, it's too painful, and that's why our model is the 501c3, the nonprofit philanthropic model. I
mean, the story continues to say, well, Mother Jones, liberal magazines, pays its president only $225. And they generated $16.6 million. The Daily Caller News Foundation, which publishes conservative content online, pays their chief development officer $138. Okay, and they keep going with all these other stories. Judicial Watch, another right-leaning group, pays its treasurer $395,000, and they go ProPublica. Anyways, they're telling all these stories. Here's kind of where I'm going with this part here. So if somebody from your own organization went out there and said, listen, I work for James. The other day he offended me because he made a joke that really upset me. He made a comment about the Chiefs losing and how excited he was, and how dare you say anything about Pat Mahomes, right? I have access to all the people that give. Here's a list. I give it out. You wouldn't care. You'd be like, okay, that's part of the whistleblower game.
Which list?
Whoever the donors are to you. That would be part of the.
I wrote a whole chapter in this book about this, and I'm writing a book about journalism ethics. I'm writing a manual because no one has really ever done this before. So I'm trying to define the boundaries, and this is a very critical point. There are only two things we keep secret. Because really, underlying your line of questioning here is this notion of hypocrisy. Like James O'Keefe, it's your cross to bear. You probably do things in private. And my answer is, listen, we all make mistakes. We're all human. But there are two things that, so help me God, I will not disclose. Because it is enshrined in the fundamental values that we hold as Americans, which is, number one, the rights to protect our sources, and the right to protect our donors. By the way, if the United States Supreme Court were to order me to reveal who released that document from the Pentagon, I would be held in contempt of court and go to jail to protect my source. I would, like Jack Anderson, the legendary muckraker from the 1970s, I would submit to Your Honor that you're in error, and I would not oblige with that, and I would have to face incarceration in perpetuity rather than disclose my source. This is enshrined in the DNA of the First Amendment. You don't disclose your source, and you don't disclose, if the NAACP, to borrow an analogy, in 1958, were ordered by the Supreme Court to disclose who donates to an organization that protects the rights of African Americans. That's what that case was about. So when you ask me, well, what if they published your information? I'm sorry, but so help me God, there are two things I will never disclose, and I cannot disclose.
Oh, by the way,
because to do so would be anathema to the very things that give us the First Amendment in the first place. Okay, so no donor has ever been. Of course, the people that are trying to disclose these donors don't share a faith in these principles. They don't like the First Amendment, and that's the only public policy issue that I take a stance on. Anything else, I don't really have political views. But on this, here I stand, I can do no other. And that's why I wrote that chapter called Secrecy, because I meditated on this, and I realized everything else I have to have disclosure on. And by the way, we do file a tax return, and we put it on our website. Do you know any other news organization that does that? No, we do. We publish that 990. We disclose everything. We go through discovery and litigation. I've been deposed more times than I can count. By the way, I like depositions. I have a good time being deposed. You know why? Because I got nothing to hide. You know who doesn't like being deposed? The New York Times. They're scared of that. You know why? Because they have everything to hide. And that's the difference, really. That's the difference between Project Veritas and anyone else. So on those two things, I would never want to disclose them, and I will fight to the death to not disclose them.
So if you enjoyed this little short segment from the podcast that we did, here's another short segment to watch. Or if you want to see the entire podcast, click over here. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.